Today, I will tell you about the day my world shifted. After my husband's funeral, my unemployed son suddenly inherited $200 million. That very night, he threw the papers at me with a smug grin and told me she was useless, that he didn't need me anymore. Days later, the lawyer asked him if he had even read the will. What followed was a twist he never expected. This is my story, and it belongs to Grandma Life Stories. If you find meaning in it, remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts, because this is a community where lessons of family, loyalty, and justice matter most. The morning of Harold's burial, the sky hung low with gray clouds, as though even heaven bowed under the weight of loss. The chapel smelled of lilies and old wood. Every bench was filled with faces lined by grief. I sat in the front row, my hands folded tightly around the handkerchief I had stitched years ago, a gift Harold had once tucked in his breast pocket on our anniversary. I thought my son would grieve with me. I thought I would see tears, or at least respect in his eyes. But when Marcus walked in, dressed in a tailored black suit he had no money to buy, I felt the cold wind of disappointment press into my chest. His eyes gleamed, not with sorrow, but with calculation. He moved down the aisle slowly, not in reverence but in performance, nodding at every mourner as though he were a politician. When he reached Harold's casket, he paused only briefly, tapping his fingers on the polished wood, and then turned to the crowd. "My father left behind more than memories," he said, voice steady, too steady. "He left a legacy, and I will continue his work." Gasps rippled through the pews. A funeral is for tears, not announcements. Yet my son stood there as though he were accepting a crown. Elena, his wife, sat a few feet away, her shoulders hunched, her eyes swollen from nights of crying. She pressed a crumpled tissue to her face, but Marcus never once looked at her. My granddaughter Rachel, only 18, stood close behind me. She clutched my arm, her grip tighter with every word her father spoke. Her eyes were not the eyes of a child anymore. They were wide, questioning, bewildered that her father could stand so tall and sound so proud on the day his own father was lowered into the ground. When Marcus stepped down from the podium, he walked among the mourners, shaking hands, smiling faintly. I heard him whisper more than once, "200 million. Father wanted me to have it all." The words spread like smoke, curling into ears and leaving discomfort behind. People came to mourn. Instead, they left unsettled, carrying home the image of a son treating death as an opportunity. I sat there numb, my heart breaking not only for Harold but for the son we had raised. Janet, an old friend of Harold's, leaned toward me. Her voice was barely audible under the hymns, yet it cut deep. "Gloria, he once told me that fairness always arrives when least expected. Trust Harold's wisdom." Her eyes were kind, but behind them I saw worry. She, too, had noticed the chill in Marcus's tone, the hunger in his gaze. As the service continued, every prayer, every verse of Scripture felt hollow against the backdrop of my son's ambition. The pastor spoke of Harold's generosity, of his life dedicated to building rather than tearing down. My husband had spent decades creating communities, not empires. He had lived modestly, even when he had the means not to. And now, on the day we were to celebrate his spirit, his own son turned it into a stage for power. Rachel whispered into my ear, "Grandma, he doesn't care. He just doesn't care." Her voice trembled with both fear and disbelief. I squeezed her hand, steadying her, though my own heart quaked. When the burial began outside, the ground was wet and soft from the night's rain. We stood beneath umbrellas, rain dripping down like steady tears from the sky. The casket was lowered, the rabbi's voice rising above the wind, solemn and sure. I clutched the folded American flag they handed me, its fabric stiff in my hands. Marcus stood beside me, but I could feel the distance between us as though he were a stranger. His eyes never left the lawyer Victor, who stood quietly in the back, briefcase in hand. In that moment, I knew Marcus had already leapt ahead in his mind. While I mourned, he was counting. While I clung to memory, he plotted his new future, and though no one said it aloud, Everyone there felt the fracture, between love and greed, between what Harold stood for and what Marcus embodied. That day marked not only the end of my husband's life, but also the beginning of a different kind of battle, one that would test the strength of our family and the truth of Harold's final words to me, that wisdom matters more than wealth. The tone was heavy, the silence after each prayer filled with a tension that clung to every mourner. The goal of that day should have been to honor Harold, but instead it revealed a chasm. Family ties were tested against the sharp edge of ambition. The world watched my son reveal himself not as a grieving man, but as an heir hungry to claim what he thought was his right. That is how the story began, with a funeral cloaked in grief, yet pierced by greed, a moment that told me everything would change, and that justice, though slow, was already moving silently beneath the surface. I remember the night in the hospital with a clarity that still rattles me. The fluorescent lights above Harold's bed buzzed faintly, throwing pale shadows across his face. His chest rose unevenly, each breath sounding like gravel dragged across stone. Machines beeped steadily, but the sound that pierced me most was his voice, thin, trembling, but sharpened with urgency. He reached for my hand. His skin was clammy, his grip weak, but insistent. "Gloria," he whispered, forcing my name through parched lips. His eyes locked on mine, dark and unyielding despite the weight of death pressing in. "Promise me you will be there at the will reading. Do not trust Marcus. Do not believe a single word he speaks. Justice will not walk a straight path. It always takes the long road." His words jolted me. I had braced for farewells, for gentle recollections of our years together. Instead, Harold gave me an order wrapped in warning. I squeezed his hand, desperate to anchor him to me, but he pressed harder, his nails scraping faintly against my skin, demanding attention. I tried to soothe him. "Rest, Harold. Save your strength." But his voice cut through like steel wire. "No, listen. Wisdom matters more than wealth. Remember that. Say it back to me." The sharpness startled me. This was no soft bedside confession. This was strategy, a final instruction drafted in the fading ink of his life. My throat burned, but I obeyed. Wisdom matters more than wealth. He exhaled a fragile sigh. For a moment, I thought he might drift away, yet he clung to consciousness, determined to brand the phrase into me. He had said it many times before during our years together, over dinner when bills loomed larger than paychecks, or when Marcus begged for yet another loan for another doomed business. But never had it carried this weight, this edge of prophecy. He drew me closer, until I felt his breath against my cheek. "Marcus will claim everything. He will think it is his right, but rights mean nothing without loyalty. The will, it carries more than numbers. It carries judgment. You must see it through." I wanted to question him, to demand clarity. What judgment? What hidden plan had he woven into legal documents? But as my mouth opened, his fingers trembled violently in mine. His strength was bleeding away with each second, and the nurse at the doorway gestured for me to calm him. Still, Harold refused silence. "You do not need to fight him," Harold whispered. His tone turned cold, deliberate. "The will shall do it for you, but you must stand firm. Do not falter when he sneers. Do not retreat when he tries to break you. Promise me you will not hand him victory." Tears pricked my eyes, not from sorrow, but from the chill of realization. This was no ordinary inheritance. This was a battlefield Harold had designed, a trap laid for a son too blind to see. I nodded once, firmly. "I promise, Harold." He smiled faintly. The corners of his lips trembled, not with peace but with grim satisfaction. "Good. Then I can leave knowing justice has a witness." His eyes flicked toward the ceiling, as though already glimpsing a world beyond. The heart monitor beeped faster, alarms flashing. Nurses rushed in, voices clipped, orders rapid. I stepped back only because they pushed me aside, but Harold's gaze never left me. Even as his chest heaved against failing lungs, he mouthed the words one last time. "Wisdom matters more than wealth." The line between life and death thinned in that sterile room. I clutched the handkerchief from my pocket, the one he had carried for decades, pressing it against my lips to keep from crying out. My tears blurred the machines, the nurses, the stark white walls. Yet through the blur, Harold's expression burned into me. Defiance, determination, and a plea all bound together. Hours later, after the chaos subsided and the room grew quiet again, I sat alone beside him. His body was still, his hand limp in mine. The phrase circled my mind in relentless loops. Wisdom matters more than wealth. Each repetition struck like a hammer, driving the truth deeper, though its full meaning escaped me. I leaned close to his ear, even though I knew he could no longer hear. I will be there. I will stand where you want me to stand. And I will not let Marcus twist your legacy. The words steadied me. They stitched my grief into resolve. The hospital's night staff moved silently in the hall, their shoes squeaking against polished linoleum. Life went on, indifferent, but inside that room, time froze. I sat beside Harold until the first rays of dawn seeped through the blinds. With the light came a strange certainty. I would not crumble. I would not let Marcus's arrogance consume the last of Harold's wisdom. When I left the hospital that morning, the city roared to life around me. Cars honking, commuters rushing, the world already forgetting the man it had just lost. But I carried his whisper like a weapon concealed under my skin. Marcus would smile at me with his rehearsed charm. He would count dollars not yet his, but I would hold the truth Harold entrusted to me. Even at the funeral, when Marcus bragged of inheritance, when his words soured the air of mourning, I heard Harold's voice beneath it all, reminding me not to break. Justice will take the long road, he had said, and I believed him. I had no map of where that road led, but I knew it was already under my feet. Harold's last words were not gentle farewells. They were warnings carved in stone. They did not soothe, they armed. That was the gift he left me, not comfort, but clarity. And with every heartbeat I felt since, I understood he had built his final legacy not in money, but in the quiet certainty that truth would rise, no matter how deeply Marcus tried to bury it. The house was still heavy with the scent of lilies when Marcus demanded we all gather at the dining table. The burial was only hours behind us, yet grief had no room to breathe. He entered with the swagger of a man untouched by loss, carrying a chilled bottle of champagne under his arm. The label gleamed gold beneath the light, one of those bottles Harold and I had saved for celebrations that never came. Marcus slammed it on the table, the cork bursting free with a crack that echoed like gunfire. Foam spilled onto the polished wood. He grinned, his eyes wild, and raised the bottle as if to toast. 200 million, Mother. That is what Father left me. 200 million. Do you understand what that means? My life begins tonight. No more failures, no more waiting. I will make the world bend to me now. Elena flinched at his words, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She had not changed from her black dress, mascara smudged around her eyes. Her grief was raw, visible, and Marcus's triumph stood in cruel contrast. I held my breath. "Marcus," I said quietly, "your father isn't cold in the ground. This is not the time." He cut me off with a sneer. "You've spent your whole life clinging to his wisdom. But wisdom never paid the bills. Wealth does. And now I have it." He turned to Elena, his voice slicing the air. "And you, dear wife, you were convenient while I scraped by. You kept the lights on. You tolerated my dreams. But your role is finished." From his jacket, he pulled out a folded packet of papers and threw them across the table. They slid to a stop in front of her plate. His grin widened, cruel and deliberate. "Those are divorce papers. Effective immediately. You're useless now. I don't need you anymore." The words struck like a blade. Elena's breath caught in her throat, and then she broke, sobs racking her body. She covered her face, shaking as though her entire being had collapsed in an instant. I reached toward her, but she recoiled, clutching the papers as though they were proof of her own worthlessness. Rachel shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. Her face burned red, tears streaming down her cheeks. Daddy, how could you? How could you do this after everything? After Grandpa's funeral? Her voice cracked, a mix of fury and heartbreak. Marcus waved her off, rolling his eyes. You're too young to understand. This is life. Power demands sacrifice. Rachel's scream pierced the air. You're a monster! She bolted from the room, her footsteps pounding up the stairs, the slam of her door rattling the frame. The silence that followed was unbearable. Elena's sobs filled it, fragile and broken. Marcus tipped the champagne bottle to his lips and drank deeply, the bubbles foaming at the corners of his mouth. He set it down with a satisfied sigh. She'll thank me one day, when she realizes I'm destined for more than this small life. My hands trembled beneath the table. In my mind, I saw Harold's face, pale and drawn in his hospital bed, his eyes fierce as he warned me. Wisdom matters more than wealth. Justice takes the long road. I felt him in that room with us, unseen but present, watching his son shred the very fabric of family with a smile. I steadied my voice. Marcus, you disgrace your father's memory tonight. He laughed, sharp and dismissive. Father's memory? He wasted his fortune hiding it away. I'll honor him by spending it. Mansions, investments, a new life in Miami. Why should I stay here tied to dead weight? His eyes flicked back to Elena, who sat hunched, silent now, her tears staining the tablecloth. I rose slowly from my chair, meeting his gaze with a calmness I did not feel. You think you've already won, but Harold was never careless. Remember that. For a split second, something flickered in Marcus's expression. Doubt, perhaps, or fear, but it vanished quickly beneath arrogance. He raised the bottle once more, tilting it toward me like a toast. Here's to 200 million, Mother, the start of everything. I did not drink. I did not reply. I simply watched as my son celebrated betrayal under the same roof where his father's portrait hung, the paint barely dry from years past. The man Harold raised was gone. In his place stood a stranger drunk on greed. Elena gathered the papers with shaking hands, her voice breaking as she whispered, What did I ever do to deserve this? Marcus leaned back, smug and untouchable. You married a man destined for greatness. Now step aside and let me claim it. The room felt colder than the graveyard soil we had stood upon earlier. I knew in that instant Harold's warning was more than words. It was a map, and Marcus, blinded by his triumph, had already stepped onto a path that would end not in glory, but in ruin. I have lived long enough to know that ruin does not arrive overnight. It builds slowly, brick by brick, failure by failure. Marcus was not born ruthless. He was made by choices, each one weaker than the last. After that night when he flaunted his inheritance and threw divorce papers across the table, I could not sleep. My mind wandered back through the years, to every time he swore he would change, to every promise Harold and I clung to until our fingers bled with hope. I remembered the cafe. Marcus had begged Harold for seed money, speaking with conviction so sharp it almost fooled me. Dad, Mom, this city needs a place with character, not those chains that serve watered-down coffee. Imagine it. A cozy cafe with live music at night, books stacked against the walls, a place where people gather because it feels like home. Give me 30,000, just 30, and I'll turn it into something beautiful. His eyes had shimmered with fire then, the kind that makes mothers want to believe. Harold squeezed my hand that night and said, One more chance, Gloria. Maybe this time he'll prove himself. I stayed silent, though my stomach twisted. We signed the check. The cafe opened on a corner in downtown. Marcus painted the walls himself, splattered with colors he claimed reflected energy and creativity. He printed menus with fonts too elaborate to read, hired musicians who played more to themselves than to customers, and stocked expensive beans that no one asked for. For 2 weeks, it felt alive. Friends dropped by, curious. Family came to show support. Harold and I bought coffee every morning just to fill the empty seats. But Marcus grew restless. He stopped arriving early, left the staff to manage alone, and spent nights in bars bragging about being a business owner. Bills piled high. The espresso machine broke twice and went unrepaired for weeks. Customers dwindled. Within 6 months, the cafe was shuttered, the lease unpaid. Marcus shrugged when we asked what happened. The market wasn't ready for my vision. I wanted to scream, but Harold placed a hand on my arm. He'll find his footing. He just needs patience. But I knew patience was no longer a gift. It was a poison we kept feeding him, one dose at a time. Then came the app. Another dream, another pitch. This one will change everything. A delivery platform that pairs local farmers with urban customers. No middleman, no wasted produce. All I need is $50,000 to launch. Tech investors will line up when they see my model. Elena had begged him to slow down. She was already working 2 jobs then, covering rent, groceries, the electricity he claimed would be temporary until success arrived. "Marcus, please," she said, her voice breaking. "We can't keep doing this. We can't live like this." He snapped at her. "You think small. You've never understood vision. Leave the risk to me." He turned to Harold. "Dad understands. Don't you?" Harold hesitated, and I saw the battle in his eyes. He wanted to believe. He wanted his son to stand tall, not stumble. In the end, he said what he always said. "One more chance." The app never launched. The code was half finished, outsourced to developers overseas who abandoned the project when Marcus failed to pay them. The website went live for a week, riddled with bugs, then vanished. Investors never came. What did come were bills, server costs, marketing campaigns, contractors demanding their fees. Elena wept as she opened each envelope. Marcus dismissed her tears with a wave. "Every success starts with setbacks. You don't see the big picture." I saw it. I saw the picture forming clearly. He was not chasing dreams. He was addicted to the idea of being exceptional without doing the work to earn it. Harold refused to face it. He defended Marcus at every family dinner. "Don't be so hard on him, Gloria. He just needs one win. Then everything will change." But I whispered in return, "Perhaps our mercy has crippled him. Perhaps love without boundaries has ruined him more than failure ever could." And so the years rolled on, failure stacked upon failure. A landscaping business with borrowed equipment, abandoned when the summer heat became too much. A consulting firm with no clients, run from a laptop he barely opened. Each time he asked for money, Harold wavered, then relented. Each time I felt my heart sink deeper, as though I were watching a drowning man throw away every life preserver we tossed. The world saw him as charming. He could fill a room with talk of disruption and innovation. But those who lived under his roof knew better. Elena's shoulders bent lower each year. Rachel grew up learning to stay quiet when her father boasted, and Harold clung to hope the way some men cling to prayer. Now, sitting alone in my bedroom after the funeral feast, I thought of all those wasted years. The champagne cork popping in the dining room still rang in my ears. Marcus thought his fortune had finally come, that $200 million erased his past. But I knew the truth. Money cannot erase character. It only magnifies what is already there. I pressed my hand against Harold's photograph on the nightstand. His smile was gentle, steady, the opposite of Marcus's hungry grin. "You always gave him another chance," I whispered into the silence. Maybe that was the worst gift of all. The memory of Harold's voice returned to me then, stern and deliberate from his hospital bed. Wisdom matters more than wealth. He had known. He had always known. And the will he left behind was not just about dividing assets. It was a mirror he crafted for Marcus, a mirror that would show him his own reflection at last. As I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark, I felt the bitterness settle into resolve. Marcus thought he was free now, untouchable, beyond consequence. But every failure in his past was waiting for him in the future, and this time the world would not shield him. Not even Harold's kindness could save him now. The house was eerily silent the evening after Marcus's drunken celebration. Elena had locked herself in the guest room, her sobs muffled by walls. Rachel had barely spoken since storming upstairs, and the weight of her silence pressed harder than her words ever could. I sat alone in the living room, the old clock ticking like a hammer against my chest. The phone vibrated suddenly, its sharp buzz shattering the heavy quiet. I snatched it up before the sound could carry. "Mrs. Bennet," a voice said, low and urgent. I recognized it instantly. Victor Lawrence, Harold's attorney. His tone held none of the polite pleasantries he usually offered. This was different. Quick, clipped, deliberate. "Tomorrow is the reading of the will. You must be there. It is crucial." I steadied my breath. "Of course I'll be there. Does Marcus know?" Victor's voice tightened. "No, and he cannot. Do not tell him. No matter what he says tonight, do not give him any reason to suspect. The terms are sensitive, and the less he knows, the better. Trust me on this." My throat constricted. Harold's last warning pulsed through my mind. Justice walks the long road. I pressed the phone closer. "Victor, what is in that will?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice even further. "I cannot say yet, but I will tell you this. Your husband was not careless. He built protections into every line. Tomorrow will be revealing." Before I could respond, footsteps echoed down the hall. Heavy, confident, Marcus's gait. My heart lurched. "I'll be there," I whispered into the phone, ending the call just as he entered. I slipped the device under the fold of the newspaper on the coffee table, my hand still trembling. Marcus swaggered into the room with the arrogance of a man who believed the world finally belonged to him. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his tie loose, as though respect was now beneath him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey without asking, the clink of ice loud in the stillness. "Mother," he said, smiling with thinly veiled triumph, "tomorrow I'll be calling brokers in Miami. Oceanfront property, penthouses, maybe even a yacht. Father left it all to me, and it's time I lived the way I was meant to. No more waiting, no more scraping." He sipped deeply, savoring it like victory itself. I clenched my jaw, careful to keep my face composed. He could not suspect. Harold's plan needed silence as much as it needed patience. "Miami," I murmured. "That's quite a leap." Marcus chuckled, swirling the amber liquid. "When you inherit 200 million, leaps are the only way forward. Elena won't be in the picture, obviously. She was never built for wealth. But I was born for this. You'll see." Rachel's shadow flickered at the edge of the staircase. She thought herself hidden, but I saw her small hand gripping the banister, her body tense, her eyes locked on her father. She had heard enough. I knew the sound of her breathing, ragged, uneven. She was trying to swallow her fear, but the truth had carved too deep already. Marcus tilted his head back, laughing to himself. "Tomorrow will mark the first day of the rest of my life." He drained the glass, slammed it on the table, and walked toward the door. "Get some rest, Mother. Soon you won't have to worry about a thing." When he left, the silence surged back, heavier than before. Rachel stepped slowly down the stairs, her face pale in the dim light. She approached me, her lips trembling, her voice barely a whisper. "Grandma, something's wrong. Daddy's not the same. I can feel it." I pulled her close, smoothing her hair, but my own heart hammered against my ribs. "I know, Rachel, I know, but tomorrow the truth will show itself." She lifted her eyes to mine, searching for reassurance. I tried to give it, though inside I felt the storm gathering. Harold had entrusted me with his last words. Victor had warned me of secrets hidden in the will, and Marcus was already drunk on dreams of grandeur. The lines were drawn, and the next day would bring the collision. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every tick of the clock dragging me closer to the inevitable. The house around me slept fitfully, but my mind replayed Harold's dying voice, Victor's warning, and Marcus's gloating. Tomorrow was not just a legal formality. The storm broke the following evening, not in the sky, but within the walls of our own house. The air was thick, heavy with the unspoken weight of Harold's absence and the poisonous arrogance Marcus carried like perfume. He entered the dining room where Elena sat quietly, her hands folded on the table, her eyes red from sleepless nights. Without warning, he struck with words sharper than knives. "Elena," he sneered, leaning across the table, his breath laced with whiskey. "You married me for money. Admit it. You thought I would be your ticket out of mediocrity. Well, Congratulations. I finally have it. 200 million. And you? You're irrelevant now." Her lips trembled, but her voice rose, steady in defiance. "If I wanted money, Marcus, I would have left you long ago. I stayed because I loved you. I stayed when you lost everything, when debt collectors called, when your businesses collapsed. I stayed because I believed in you. What I have now is not wealth, it's shame. Shame for ever trusting that you could be the man you promised to be." Her words cut deeper than any curse. Marcus's face reddened, his jaw tightening. He slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses rattle. "Shame? You dare speak of shame when you've leached off my ambition? You never built anything. You've only ever clung to me like dead weight." I stepped forward, my heart pounding, my voice commanding, though my hands trembled. "Marcus, enough. Don't turn this house into a marketplace for your pride. This is where your father lived, where Rachel grew up. Control yourself." He turned on me, fury blazing in his eyes. "Control myself? You're the reason I'm weak. You and father. You coddled me. You clipped my wings. And now you want to silence me? You're old, mother. Stay out of this. This is my life, my fortune, my future. Keep your wrinkled hands off it." The words struck like physical blows. For a moment I couldn't breathe. But before I could gather my reply, Rachel rushed between us. Her small frame trembled, her arms spread wide as if she could shield me and Elena both. Her voice cracked under the strain. "Stop it! Please! Daddy! Stop!" Her tears streamed freely, her chest heaving as she looked from her father's twisted rage to Elena's shattered silence. She was only 18, yet in that moment she bore the weight of generations of conflict, of loyalty fractured by greed. Her presence froze us all. Elena rose slowly, her voice breaking but unyielding. "Do you hear yourself, Marcus? Do you even see your daughter? She hears everything, every insult, every betrayal. You're not only destroying me, you're destroying her." Marcus laughed bitterly, though it rang hollow. "Rachel will understand one day. She'll see that wealth demands strength, not weakness. Love doesn't build empires. Money does." Rachel shook her head violently, sobbing. "No, Daddy, you're wrong. Grandpa had money, but what I admired about him wasn't wealth. It was kindness. He cared about people. You care about nothing." She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. I placed my hand gently on her back, steadying her as best I could. Then I looked Marcus in the eye. "You think you've risen above us all, but you've only exposed yourself. You've taken your wife's devotion and turned it into humiliation. You've turned your daughter's love into fear, and you dare to stand in this house, under your father's roof, and call it strength?" His eyes narrowed, rage and insecurity warring behind them. For a moment, he opened his mouth to strike again, but no words came. Instead, he shoved his chair back violently, its legs screeching against the floor. He stormed out, his footsteps thundering up the stairs until a door slammed with a finality that shook the walls. The silence left behind was thick, suffocating. Elena sank back into her chair, tears streaking her face. Rachel clung to me, sobbing softly, her body trembling in my arms. I stroked her hair and whispered, though my voice was iron beneath the softness, "You are not useless. Neither of you are. Do not let his words poison your spirit. His storm will pass, and when it does, justice will be waiting." In that moment, Harold's presence felt nearer than ever. His voice echoed in my mind. Wisdom matters more than wealth. It was a lifeline, a reminder that Marcus's cruelty was not the final word. The final word belonged to the truth Harold had left hidden, waiting for its moment to strike. The fractures in our family had widened into chasms that night. Trust was broken, love was scarred, and yet, beneath it all, I felt a grim certainty. Marcus believed he had silenced us with his money and his rage. But tomorrow, when the will was read, his voice would no longer dominate. The truth Harold left behind would speak louder than Marcus ever could. Rachel came to me late that night, long after Marcus had slammed his door upstairs and silence had swallowed the house. I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at nothing, when I heard her small footsteps. She paused in the doorway, her face pale in the dim light, her eyes carrying a secret too heavy for her young shoulders. "Grandma," she whispered, barely audible, as if the walls themselves might betray her. "I need to tell you something, but you can't let Daddy know I said it." I set the cup down carefully, my heart already racing. "What is it, Rachel? You can trust me." She hesitated, twisting her fingers together, then stepped closer. Her voice quivered, but her words struck like lightning. "I saw him, a few nights ago. Daddy found a copy of the will. He pulled it from Father's study drawer. I was in the hallway. He read half a page, maybe less, and then he crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. He was furious, Grandma." He muttered to himself, but I couldn't catch it all. My chest tightened, Harold's dying voice roaring back in my memory. Justice does not walk a straight path. Wisdom matters more than wealth. My husband had left me warnings, and now my granddaughter had unearthed proof that Marcus already knew more than he wanted to admit. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to match hers. "Rachel, are you certain? Did he see the full document?" She shook her head quickly. "No. He barely looked at it. He read a few lines, then stopped. He didn't even notice me watching from the stairs. His face, Grandma, I've never seen him look like that. Not angry like when he yells, but scared, almost like he had been caught. Then he cursed and said something about fools who think words mean more than money. After that, he ripped the paper and threw it in the fire." My breath caught. He had destroyed his only glimpse at his father's last intentions, too blinded by arrogance to finish even a single page. He had touched the truth and rejected it, and in that choice lay his undoing. Rachel's hands trembled as she clutched my arm. "What if the will isn't what he thinks, Grandma? What if Grandpa didn't leave it all to him?" I placed my hand over hers, firm, steady. "Then tomorrow he will learn. Harold never spoke without meaning. He told me his wisdom mattered more than wealth. Those were his last words to me. Whatever is written in that will, it carries more than money. It carries his judgment." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't born of fear. They were lit with hope. "So, there's a chance?" "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze with all the strength I had left. "There is always a chance when truth has yet to speak." We sat together in the stillness, the clock ticking away the final hours before the reading. Rachel leaned against me, her body fragile, but her spirit fierce. She had seen her father's mask slip, had glimpsed his fear, and she understood more than she should have at her age. I thought of Harold again, of every time he defended Marcus, of every chance he gave him. Perhaps those chances weren't wasted. Perhaps they were part of the lesson Harold wanted his son to face. That entitlement without loyalty is nothing but sand slipping through fingers. Rachel whispered again, her voice trembling but steady enough to cut through the silence. "Grandma, Daddy always told me Grandpa loved him the most. But what if Grandpa trusted you more than anyone? What if that's why he made the will the way he did?" Her words sent a shiver through me. Harold had known Marcus better than anyone. He had seen the failures, the arrogance, the greed, and yet he still left behind an inheritance, not of wealth alone, but of truth. I kissed Rachel's forehead and pulled her close. "Your grandfather trusted wisdom to reveal itself at the right time. Tomorrow, when we sit before Victor, we'll see what he planned. And whatever happens, you must remember, love and honor are worth more than any fortune your father believes he holds." Rachel nodded, her eyes glistening but fierce. For the first time in days, she looked less like a frightened child and more like a young woman standing on the edge of strength. As the night deepened, I lay awake replaying Harold's words, Rachel's revelation, and the image of Marcus ripping his own salvation to pieces. Tomorrow would not just be a reading of paper and ink, it would be the moment when arrogance collided with truth. The house creaked with the restless weight of anticipation. Marcus slept upstairs, dreaming of Miami penthouses and yachts. Elena wept softly in the guest room, her heart shattered, but her dignity intact. Rachel lay curled against me, whispering in her sleep, fragments of hope tangled with fear. I stared at the ceiling, every nerve in my body alive. Harold had left me a torch, and tomorrow, in that lawyer's office, the flame would finally reveal what shadows Marcus had tried so hard to ignore. The morning of the meeting with Victor, the air was sharp, almost electric, as though the world itself braced for revelation. Rachel clung to my arm as we walked into the law office, her eyes scanning every shadow. Elena followed quietly, her face pale but determined, her dignity stitched together with invisible thread. Marcus had gone ahead, arrogant and certain, his stride brisk, as if he already owned the place. Victor greeted us with a solemn nod. His office was lined with heavy oak shelves, books thick with the weight of law and precedent. But it was the leather-bound notebook he held in his hands that drew my attention. He gestured for me to sit, his eyes meeting mine with a gravity that pressed against my ribs. "Mrs. Bennet," he said carefully, "Harold left more than a will. He left instructions, detailed and deliberate. He anticipated what Marcus might do, and he wanted you to know before the public reading." He placed the notebook on the table, sliding it across the polished surface. My fingers trembled as I opened it, the pages worn, Harold's handwriting steady yet urgent. The first lines stung like fresh salt on an open wound. "If Marcus divorces his wife within 1 year of my passing, the entirety of my estate shall bypass him. Instead, it will be transferred to the Harbor Light Foundation to fund education and housing for families in need." The words leapt from the page, final and immovable. Harold had not been vague. He had set a trap designed to test his son's loyalty, his patience, his integrity. And Marcus had already sprung it, blind to the warning, drunk on greed. I pressed my hand against the page, feeling the grooves of Harold's pen as though they carried his very pulse. Rachel leaned closer, her eyes wide. "Grandma, he already divorced her. Daddy already threw the papers. That means—" I hushed her quickly, though my own heart thundered with the same realization. "Yes, Rachel, but not a word to your father yet. This must come out when the will is read. Until then, silence." Elena's voice cracked as she spoke, her hands twisting in her lap. "Harold, he thought of me? He protected me?" I turned to her, my voice firm. "He protected the truth, Elena. He knew Marcus's weakness. He knew wealth without wisdom is poison, and he chose to shield all of us from what Marcus might become." Victor leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Bennet, understand this. The clause is ironclad. Marcus will not escape it. He will walk into that room tomorrow certain of his fortune, and he will walk out stripped of it. But it will not be easy. He will rage. He will accuse. He will turn on you. Perhaps even on me. You must be prepared." I closed the notebook, my resolve hardening like stone. Harold had entrusted me with more than memory. He had armed me with truth. Marcus would finally face the weight of his own actions, and no amount of arrogance could save him. Rachel gripped my hand tighter, her voice fierce despite the tremor in it. "Grandma, you have to stay strong. For Grandpa, for us." I looked at her, my granddaughter, standing taller than her fear, and I nodded. "Strength is the only option now." Victor cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "There is one more thing. Harold's note at the end of this entry." He pointed to the final lines, scrawled in a hand that trembled yet remained deliberate. "Gloria, remember this. Justice is patient, but it always arrives. Marcus must face himself in front of those he thought beneath him. Only then will wisdom matter more than wealth." I swallowed hard, the words echoing like thunder inside me. Justice is patient. And tomorrow, it would arrive. As we rose to leave, Victor's hand lingered on my shoulder. "Be ready, Mrs. Bennet. By this time tomorrow, your son will no longer be the man he believes he is. The truth will take everything from him." Walking out of that office, I felt the weight of Harold's plan pressing on my shoulders, but beneath it all, there was clarity. The storm Marcus had unleashed within our family was about to break in full view, and when it did, The very arrogance that had carried him this far would be the anchor that dragged him under. The night before the will reading, the house split itself into fragments of dreams and despair. Marcus stormed through the living room with his phone in hand, grinning like a boy unwrapping gifts that weren't his yet. He shoved the glowing screen in my face, his voice booming with excitement. "Look at this, Mother. A penthouse in Miami. Glass walls, ocean views, 25 floors up. And here, a Lamborghini, fire red, custom leather interior. Tomorrow they'll all be mine. Finally, I'll live the life I deserve." I stared at him, my silence deliberate, my eyes steady. He mistook my stillness for awe and kept scrolling, his grin stretching wider. "No more small-town nonsense. No more cafes that fail. No more begging investors. This is power, Mother. Tomorrow, the world shifts in my favor." His words reeked of arrogance, and yet beneath it, I sensed the hollowness. He clung to fantasies because reality had never given him triumph. The louder he boasted, the clearer his desperation became. From the hallway, Elena appeared, her arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. She watched Marcus parade his imaginary kingdom, and tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She turned without a word, retreating upstairs. Moments later, I heard the soft thud of a suitcase pulled from the closet, the faint scrape of zippers. Rachel followed her mother into the bedroom, confusion clouding her young face. I lingered in the doorway, watching Elena fold clothes with trembling hands. She placed each garment neatly, as though order could steady her chaos. Rachel clutched her waist, whispering through tears, "Mom, don't go. Please, don't leave me with him." Elena bent down, pressing her forehead to her daughter's. "I don't want to leave you, Rachel. But your father, he's no longer the man I married. He sees us as weights dragging him down. I can't stay here and be his punching bag while he dreams of cars and condos." Rachel sobbed, her small fists clutching the fabric of Elena's dress. "But tomorrow, maybe tomorrow everything will change?" Elena's eyes flicked to me, pleading silently for answers. I stepped inside, my voice firm but quiet. "Rachel, listen to me. Tomorrow will be the day truth speaks louder than lies. Trust your grandfather's wisdom. He saw further than any of us." Rachel's tears slowed, but her grip on her mother didn't ease. Elena kissed the top of her head, whispering, "I'll wait, just one more day. If nothing changes, then I'll go." In the living room, Marcus poured himself a glass of scotch, raising it as if to toast his own reflection. His voice carried through the walls, arrogant and unyielding. To Marcus Bennett, the man who finally conquered his fate, to fortune, freedom, and a future without burdens. He laughed, the sound echoing like thunder in an empty canyon. I sat at the foot of my bed later, Harold's photograph resting on my lap. His eyes, forever calm, stared back at me. I traced the frame with my fingers, whispering into the stillness, "Tomorrow, Harold, tomorrow your voice will rise again. Justice will finally be heard." The house pulsed with tension. Marcus's laughter, Elena's quiet weeping, Rachel's muffled prayers. They all collided under one roof, a symphony of fracture. The walls themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting. As the clock neared midnight, Marcus staggered upstairs, still clutching his phone, muttering about Miami sunsets and engines roaring down coastal highways. Elena closed the suitcase, but left it by the door, her decision balanced on the edge of dawn. Rachel crawled into bed beside me, her hand gripping mine tightly, unwilling to let go. I stared into the darkness, my resolve sharpened like steel. Tomorrow was no longer a date on paper, it was a reckoning. Marcus believed he had already won, but in truth, the game hadn't even begun. Harold's words thundered in my chest. Wisdom matters more than wealth. By this time tomorrow, Marcus would understand, too late, that arrogance is its own undoing. The lawyer's office was hushed, the air thick with anticipation. Marcus sat at the long mahogany table, his shoulders thrown back, a smirk tugging at his lips as though the fortune were already in his pocket. Elena sat stiffly across from him, her hands folded tight in her lap. Rachel sat beside me, her fingers gripping mine under the table, her breath shallow. Victor adjusted his glasses, the weight of every eye in the room pressing on him as he opened Harold's will. He cleared his throat, his voice steady, deliberate. According to the last will and testament of Harold Bennett, his son, Marcus Bennett, shall inherit the estate valued at approximately $200 million. Marcus leaned back, grinning triumphantly. He muttered under his breath, "Knew it!" Victor's voice sharpened. "However, there are conditions." The smirk faltered. Marcus leaned forward, confusion flickering across his face. "Conditions? What do you mean, conditions?" Victor lifted the page, his tone unyielding. Harold Bennett explicitly stated that Marcus Bennett will only receive the $200 million if he maintains his marriage to Elena Bennett for no less than 1 year following Harold's death. If the marriage dissolves before that time, the entire estate will be transferred to the Harbor Light Foundation, a charitable trust established for community housing and education. The words detonated in the room like thunder. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Rachel squeezed my hand until my knuckles turned white. Marcus froze, his eyes wide, the color draining from his face. "What?" His voice cracked, fury breaking through the shock. "That's impossible. That can't be legal." Victor didn't flinch. "It is perfectly legal, Mr. Bennett. Your father anticipated your actions. He drafted this clause with great care. The marriage must remain intact for a full year. If not, you inherit nothing." Marcus's fists slammed against the table, the sound echoing off the walls. "He had no right. That was my money. He knew I needed it. He knew I deserved it." Victor raised his eyes slowly, his words cutting like blades. "It was never your money. It was his. And he had every right to decide how it would be passed. He did not leave you a fortune without wisdom. He left you a test." Rachel leaned toward me, her voice a trembling whisper. "Grandma, this is it, right? This is what Grandpa meant?" I nodded once, my eyes never leaving Marcus. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with grim satisfaction. Harold's voice echoed in my mind. Wisdom matters more than wealth. And here it was, carved into legal stone. Marcus's face contorted, rage twisting him into something unrecognizable. He turned on Elena, his voice venomous. "You! This is your fault! You poisoned him against me. You made him doubt me. You think you've won, don't you?" Elena rose to her feet, her tears replaced with steel. "I wanted nothing but to stand beside you. I endured your failures, your arrogance, your cruelty. This is not my doing. This is who you are." Marcus roared, shoving back his chair so hard it nearly toppled. "I won't accept this. I'll challenge it. I'll sue. I'll burn every penny before I let it go to some charity." Victor closed the will with a snap, his tone final. "You may try, Mr. Bennett, but the courts will uphold it. Your father foresaw this as well. Every line is airtight. You can rage, but the outcome will not change." The room pulsed with tension. Marcus's chest heaved as he stared at us, his family, as though we were enemies. Elena stood tall, Rachel clung to me, and I sat unmoving, watching my son unravel. Inside me, a storm of emotions raged, grief for the boy I once rocked to sleep, sorrow for the man who had lost his way, and a fierce vindication that Harold's wisdom had not died with him. Marcus's voice broke the silence once more, raw with desperation. No, this isn't happening. I won. I already won." His words were hollow now, fragile echoes of the arrogance he wore like armor. Victor leaned back, folding his hands. "The reading is concluded. The will stands as written. Mr. Bennett, your choices have already sealed your fate." Rachel buried her face against my shoulder, whispering, "Grandma, Grandpa was right. Justice takes the long road." But it came. I held her close, my eyes fixed on Marcus. His empire of illusions had collapsed in a single paragraph, and there was no one left for him to blame but himself. The air after the will reading was poisoned with Marcus's fury. He stormed out of Victor's office, his hands shaking, his face twisted with disbelief. We followed, silent, each step carrying the weight of Harold's justice. Outside, the sky threatened rain, gray clouds pressing low, as if the heavens themselves prepared to wash away the arrogance of my son. Marcus spun on his heels, his eyes wild, his voice cracking under the strain of desperation. He lunged toward Elena, grabbing her arm. "Elena, listen to me. We can fix this. You can pull back the divorce papers. Do you understand? If you take them back, the money stays with me. $200 million. Think of what we could have, what we could build. Don't throw this away." Elena jerked her arm free, her eyes blazing through her tears. "What we could have? Marcus, you threw it away the moment you called me useless. Do you think I forgot? You humiliated me in front of your mother and daughter. You celebrated your inheritance with champagne while I wept. And now you dare to ask me to save you? No amount of money can erase what you've done." Marcus staggered back as if her words struck harder than fists. He spread his hands in frantic pleading. "I didn't mean it. I was angry. I was drunk. I said things I shouldn't have. But Elena, please, this is $200 million. Do you realize what that means? You'll never have to work another day. Rachel could have the best schools, the best future. We could finally live like royalty." Her voice cut through his frenzy like ice. "Rachel already has a future without your wealth. She has me, and she has her grandmother. What she doesn't need is a father who sees her as a bargaining chip. I would rather scrub floors the rest of my life than live one more day chained to your greed." He clenched his fists, his breath coming fast and shallow. "Don't do this. Don't ruin me." I stepped forward then, my voice steady, carved from the steel Harold left me. "Marcus, you ruined yourself. Your father foresaw this day. He knew your hunger, your recklessness, and he prepared for it. You didn't lose the money because of Elena. You lost it because you betrayed her, because you betrayed the very values your father lived by." Marcus whipped his head toward me, his eyes blazing with raw anger. "You think this is justice? You think Father loved you more than me? He punished me from the grave, and you stand here proud of it." I did not flinch. "I am not proud, Marcus. I am broken-hearted. But Harold was right. Wisdom matters more than wealth, and you proved him right by throwing away both in the same breath." Rachel, standing close beside me, spoke softly, her voice trembling yet fierce. "Daddy, Grandpa trusted you, and you let him down. You let all of us down." Marcus's lips quivered, his eyes darting wildly as though searching for escape. He dropped his gaze, his voice barely audible now. "I just wanted to win, to prove I was worth something." Elena shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You could have proved it by standing with your family, by keeping your vows, by being a husband, a father, a son. Instead, you chose greed, and now, Marcus, you stand alone." His knees buckled slightly, his hand gripping the wall as though the world spun beneath him. The defiance drained from his face, replaced by the hollow stare of a man watching his empire collapse into dust. His voice cracked one last time, hoarse and broken. "Please, Elena, I can change. I'll be better. Just don't leave me." She met his eyes with unshakable resolve. "I already left the moment you called me worthless. The papers are only the proof." Silence fell heavy. Rain began to patter against the pavement, soft at first, then harder, a cleansing rhythm that seemed to underscore the finality of the moment. I stepped closer to Marcus, my words final, deliberate. "Your father gave you everything. Love, support, second chances, and now he has given you what you earned. Nothing. Learn from this if you can. But the wealth is gone, and so is the family you refuse to honor." He sank into the chair outside Victor's office, his shoulders caving, his hands clutching his head. For the first time, Marcus looked small, not powerful, not triumphant, but defeated by his own reflection. Inside me, bitterness clashed with sorrow. He was my son, yet I could not rescue him from himself. Justice had come, cruel yet necessary. Harold's plan had worked. Marcus's downfall was not a theft, but a revelation. And as I wrapped my arm around Rachel and guided Elena away, I left Marcus there in the rain, crumbling under the weight of his own betrayal. When the storm of Marcus's outburst had quieted, Victor asked me to remain seated. Elena and Rachel stood close, their hands still trembling from the confrontation. Marcus had stormed away, consumed by his own ruin, leaving only silence behind. Victor cleared his throat and reached into his briefcase, pulling out a sealed envelope and a separate folder. His eyes softened as he placed them before me. "Mrs. Bennet," he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning, "your husband left one more instruction. This one was private. It was meant only for you." I hesitated, my fingers trembling as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter in Harold's familiar script, each stroke steady, deliberate, like the man himself. I drew in a breath and began to read. "To Gloria, my partner, my anchor, the love of my life. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer by your side. I know grief is a heavy chain, but I did not want to leave you without light. I have set aside $500,000, not from the estate tied to Marcus, but from what I quietly secured for us years ago. This money is yours, free of conditions, free of disputes. Use it as you see fit, to guide Rachel, to help Elena rebuild, and to live in peace. You have carried this family with grace and dignity. Now carry yourself with freedom. Justice will find its way, but I wanted you to have security, not as my widow, but as the woman I trusted most. Wisdom matters more than wealth, but you deserve both comfort and choice. Let this gift remind you that love endures beyond the grave. Yours forever, Harold." My chest tightened, tears welling though my lips curved into a fragile smile. Harold, even in death, had thought of me, not with grandeur, not with conditions, but with simple, steady care. 500,000 may not have been the staggering fortune Marcus believed he had secured, but it was more than enough for dignity, for independence, for peace. Victor slid the folder across the desk. "The funds have already been arranged. They are secure in your name. No one can contest them." Harold was very clear. Elena gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. Rachel's eyes shone with relief, a spark of joy breaking through the shadows that had lingered since the funeral. She gripped my hand tightly. "Grandma, see? Grandpa thought of you. He made sure you would be safe." I nodded, my heart steadying. "Yes, Rachel, he always thought ahead. Even when we doubted him, Harold carried the truth quietly." Elena's voice wavered as she spoke. "He knew Marcus would destroy everything, but he didn't leave you empty. He left you what really mattered, his trust." I looked at her, my voice firmer now. "And he left us the responsibility to use it wisely. This isn't about indulgence or luxury. It's about rebuilding what Marcus tried to shatter. Rachel's education, your new beginning, Elena, and a future not bound by greed." Victor leaned back, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Your husband believed in you, Mrs. Bennet. He knew you would carry his values forward, not just his name." I folded the letter carefully, holding it close to my chest. Harold's words warmed me, even as grief pressed against my ribs. For the first time since his passing, I felt not only loss, but renewal. He had left me more than money. He had left me a mandate, a path forward. Rachel whispered, her eyes searching mine. "Grandma, does this mean we'll be okay?" I smiled softly, brushing her hair back from her face. "Yes, my dear, we'll be more than okay. We'll be free." The mood shifted in that office. Where moments before the air had been thick with rage and defeat, now there was light. Elena stood taller, Rachel's tears eased, and even my own heart, battered by weeks of sorrow, began to beat with quiet strength. I rose, clutching the letter, and turned toward Harold's photograph on the wall behind Victor's desk. His portrait hung there from years past, his eyes steady, his smile calm. I whispered under my breath, so only he and I would hear. "Thank you, Harold. Justice spoke today, and so did your love." As we left the office, the rain had stopped. The clouds parted, a thin line of sun cutting through, glinting against the wet pavement. Elena walked beside Rachel, their steps in rhythm, their bond unbroken. I followed with Harold's letter close to my heart, the 500,000 not as a symbol of wealth, but of faith. For Marcus, wealth had been a weapon, a trophy, a fragile illusion. For me, this gift was something else entirely, a reminder that Harold's wisdom endured, and that our family, scarred but still standing, had been given another chance to live not for greed, but for grace. The weeks after the will reading felt like stepping out of a storm cellar and realizing the sky was finally clear. The air carried a new weight, not of grief alone, but of possibility. For the first time since Harold's passing, I saw a horizon that was not clouded by Marcus's greed. I began with a promise to myself. Harold's last words, "Wisdom matters more than wealth," would not gather dust in a drawer. They would breathe life. So, when Victor introduced me to the directors at the Harbor Light Foundation, I accepted their invitation to contribute. At first, I wondered what a grieving widow could offer, but the answer came quickly. I had decades of financial discipline, lessons from hardship, and scars carved by Marcus's failures. I had lived the very truths Harold had wanted others to understand. The first morning I entered the community center, I carried his letter in my purse. The room was filled with strangers, young mothers with notebooks, retirees seeking guidance, students eager but uncertain. I felt my knees tremble as I stood at the front, but then I thought of Harold leaning across our kitchen table, sketching numbers on napkins, explaining compound interest with patience. I smiled and began to speak. Money is not magic. It is a mirror. It shows who you are. The question is, do you control it, or does it control you? The room stilled, heads nodding, pens scratching. For 2 hours, I poured out what Harold and I had learned, not just about interest rates and credit scores, but about dignity, choices, and survival. When the session ended, a young man approached me, his voice low. "Ma'am, no one has ever explained it like that. I feel like I finally see a way forward." In that moment, I knew Harold's legacy had taken root. Meanwhile, Elena was building something of her own. The day after she signed the divorce papers, I feared she might collapse under the weight of betrayal, but instead, she rose. She applied for a position at a local design firm, one she had once dismissed because Marcus had told her she was better off at home. When the acceptance letter arrived, she held it with shaking hands and whispered, "I am finally my own woman." Rachel clung to her mother during those first days, still shaken by her father's cruelty, but even she began to bloom. She came to my sessions at Harbor Light, not because she needed financial advice, but because she wanted to see me in that light. After one class, she squeezed my hand and said, "Grandma, I want to be strong like you. I want to make choices that honor people, not hurt them." I kissed her forehead, whispering, "Then you already are stronger than you know." At home, our routines shifted into something gentler. The house, once heavy with Marcus's arrogance, now carried laughter. Elena cooked simple meals that tasted like triumph. Rachel filled the evenings with questions about life and stories about school. I found myself lingering by Harold's photograph each night, whispering thanks that his wisdom had survived the storm. Marcus's shadow still hovered, of course. Rumors reached us about him applying for jobs far beneath the lifestyle he once boasted about debts piling high. Yet his downfall no longer defined us. Our energy was no longer chained to his failures. We were building, not repairing. One evening, after a particularly moving session at the foundation, I returned home to find Elena and Rachel waiting with a surprise. On the kitchen table sat a small cake, unevenly frosted but glowing with candles. "For you, Mom," Elena said, her smile trembling. "For showing us how to start over." Rachel added, "For showing us what real wealth looks like." I closed my eyes, tears pressing forward, but my voice steady as I made a wish, not for riches, not for vengeance, but for courage to keep walking this new road. When I opened them, the two women beside me were the proof that wish had already been granted. As the months passed, the foundation offered me a permanent role. Elena thrived at her job, sketching designs late into the night, her eyes lit with purpose. Rachel began volunteering at the center, helping younger kids understand budgeting. Our home, once fractured, became a hub of healing. The transformation was not instant. It was earned, one choice at a time. We learned that wealth without wisdom collapses, but wisdom, even with modest means, builds a fortress. That night, as I wrote in Harold's journal, I realized something vital. Marcus had inherited a fortune and lost it within days. I had inherited wisdom, and it was multiplying with each life touched, each step Elena and Rachel took into their future. Harold's voice echoed again in my heart. Wisdom matters more than wealth. For the first time, I truly understood. The news reached me in fragments, whispered from neighbors and murmured at the market. Marcus, my son, who once bragged about condos in Miami and cars he would never own, was now answering phones at a call center on the edge of town. The irony cut sharp. A man who once believed himself destined for millions now spent his days apologizing to strangers for service outages. At first, I did not believe it. Pride had always been his shield. I imagined he would rather vanish than be seen living such a life. But one cold morning, walking home from the Harbor Light Foundation, I saw him. He stood outside a convenience store, a thin jacket pulled tight against the wind, his shoulders hunched. His once confident stride was gone. He shuffled, dragging his feet, his eyes darting without focus. I froze, my breath caught. This was not the Marcus who had raised champagne in my dining room, sneering at Elena, calling her useless. This was a man hollowed out by choices, by arrogance, by the collapse of his illusions. He noticed me then. Our eyes locked for a moment that stretched longer than I expected. His face had thinned, his jaw was unshaven, his hair unkempt. He did not smile, nor sneer. His lips trembled as though forming words, but none came. He only looked at me, and in that silence, I saw his defeat. Rachel's hand tugged at mine gently, her whisper steady. "Grandma, is that—" I squeezed her hand and nodded. She looked at me with wide eyes, waiting for anger, for judgment. But I had none left. I stepped closer, not out of affection, but out of something quieter. He opened his mouth finally, a rasp escaping. "Mom, I raised my hand slightly, stopping him. There was nothing to say that could mend what had been broken. My voice was calm, stripped of bitterness. "Marcus, life gave you every chance. Your father gave you more than enough, and still, you chose this path." His eyes watered. Whether from the wind or shame, I could not tell. He looked down at the cracked pavement, his shoulders trembling. I waited for the wave of anger that had once consumed me, but it never came. Only sadness, a sadness too heavy for words. I turned to Rachel. "Let's go." My feet carried me forward, and she followed. As we walked away, I did not look back. That night, I sat by Harold's picture and whispered, "Justice has its way, doesn't it?" I remembered his truest lesson. Wisdom matters more than wealth. I realized Marcus had never believed those words. To him, wealth had always been the end, not the means. And so, without wisdom, the fortune he thought was his had dissolved into nothing. In truth, I felt no triumph. Watching my own child unravel was not victory, it was tragedy. Yet it was also the clearest reminder that choices carve destinies. The world had not wronged him. His greed had, his cruelty had, his blindness had. At the foundation the next day, I told the class, "Money is like a torch. In wise hands, it lights the way. In foolish ones, it burns everything near." I spoke with Marcus's face still fresh in my mind, the weight of his fall shaping every syllable. The room listened in silence, many nodding, some with tears in their eyes. They understood it was not theory, it was life. The rumors of Marcus continued. Unpaid bills, landlords chasing him, friends turning their backs. Each story was a thread unraveling a man who had once thought himself untouchable. And yet, I prayed silently he would one day learn, even from the ashes of his mistakes. When Rachel asked me later, "Grandma, do you still love him?" I paused before answering. Love is not erased, child, but love does not blind us to truth. Sometimes the greatest love is letting someone bear the weight of their own choices. She nodded slowly, her young mind processing words she would carry into her own adulthood. That, perhaps, was Harold's final gift, turning pain into wisdom that would guide the next generation. Marcus's downfall was not a spectacle for me to relish. It was a shadow cast over a lesson that had to be lived. For those who chase fortune without honor, the end is always the same: emptiness. And so, when I think of my son now, I do not think of millions or lawsuits or champagne toasts. I see him standing on that cold morning, shivering outside a store, his eyes hollow. That image is enough, not for vengeance but for memory, a reminder of what greed does and why wisdom must always lead. The evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned after storms had passed. I sat by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, Harold's old journal resting on my lap. The final rays of the sun spilled across the pages, making his handwriting glow as though he were speaking again through the ink. My fingers traced the words I had memorized, yet could never read without pause. Wisdom matters more than wealth. Rachel sat cross-legged on the rug nearby, her schoolbook scattered, her pen tapping against her notebook. She looked up at me, her eyes bright, carrying that mix of youth's curiosity and the weight of what she had already seen. "Grandma," she asked softly, "why did Grandpa write it so many times?" I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest, feeling Harold's presence as if he were still beside me. "Because, child," I answered, my voice steady. "He wanted to make sure the lesson outlived him. Money can vanish in a blink, but wisdom shapes every choice, every path. It protects, it guides, and it heals." Rachel leaned closer, her small hand resting on my knee. "I think I'll remember it forever," she whispered. Her voice carried no doubt. She had watched her father rise and fall in a blaze of arrogance, and she had watched the strength that grew in its aftermath. She did not need convincing. She had lived the truth of those words. I turned the page once more, finding a note Harold had written in smaller, almost hurried script. It read, "If the day comes when despair feels louder than hope, remember that kindness and integrity will always rebuild what greed destroys." My throat tightened as I read it aloud. Elena, who had just stepped into the room carrying folded laundry, stopped and listened. Her eyes glistened, and she nodded slowly. "That's what kept me standing, Gloria. When he called me useless, when he threw away what we had, I thought I was broken. But integrity pulled me back. I see it now." I reached for her hand, squeezing it. "You are far from useless, Elena. You are proof that Harold's words hold power." She smiled faintly, setting the laundry down, her face no longer lined with fear but with resolve. The clock ticked in the background, and for the first time in a long while, the sound was comforting. Not a reminder of time slipping away, but of life continuing. Rachel picked up her notebook and scribbled Harold's phrase in large letters, circling it with determination. She lifted the page toward me and said, "I'm going to keep it on my desk. Every time I think about making a choice, I'll ask if it's wise, not just easy." Tears pricked my eyes, but they were not the bitter tears of loss. They were tears of fulfillment, of seeing the seed Harold had planted bloom in the next generation. Later that night, as the house settled into silence, I sat again at the window, Harold's photograph resting against the sill. His gentle smile stared back at me, the same smile that had calmed me through countless storms. I spoke softly, my words carried by the night air. "You were right, my love. Wealth made Marcus blind, but wisdom is opening the eyes of those who remain. Your legacy is safe." I did not feel hatred for Marcus anymore, only sorrow for a man who had every chance but never grasped the truth in front of him. The world had handed him a fortune, and in days he had thrown it away. What remained was the harsh but fair lesson that choices define destiny. I took a deep breath and opened Harold's journal to the final page. His handwriting, shaky but strong, read, "Gloria, if you are reading this, remember that true richness is found not in bank accounts, but in the lives we touch. Live with grace and teach Rachel that kindness is the wealth no one can steal." I let the words settle in the room. The lamp flickered softly, casting a glow that felt almost like his presence wrapping around us. I closed the journal gently, kissed its cover, and placed it on the shelf where Rachel could one day pass it down to her children. When Rachel came to kiss me goodnight, she paused at Harold's picture. "Good night, Grandpa," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. Then she looked at me and added, "And thank you for teaching me." I hugged her tightly, whispering into her hair, "No, my dear, thank your grandfather. I'm only carrying his message forward." As the night deepened, I realized this was the true ending, not a clash of inheritance, not Marcus's downfall, but the quiet continuation of wisdom, alive in the hearts of those who chose to listen. Harold's smile lingered in the photo, and in that moment, I knew that wealth might come and go, but wisdom endures, carving paths even through the darkest nights. That was the inheritance that mattered,